Hello all, here in San Francisco on a drizzly, foggy morning. Lots of dripping from the trees. There's no sign that the fog is about to go away for the rest of the summer. But what I wanted to ask you guys is, what do you think about the Fukushima water release? Radioactive wastewater release in the Pacific Ocean from Japan. Lots of countries are really protesting, which they should. And China, Korea, a lot of them, they're pissed off over it. The fishermen of Japan are pissed off with it. And the experts tell us that this water is perfectly safe. It's better than drinking water. Well, if it's better than drinking water, then why are we throwing it away in the Pacific Ocean? Why not just use it for your drinking, your municipal drinking water, since you have so much of it? You could just drink it. But I don't see any of those quote-unquote experts drinking the water to show us that it's perfectly safe to throw into the ocean. What a bunch of hypocrites, you know. They say it's safe when they know it isn't. They know that this tritium, which is in this wastewater, causes cancer. They say that there's less tritium in this water than there is in drinking water. Then I say again, how come they're not drinking it and using it to wash and bathe and water their plants and their gardens with, instead of throwing it in the ocean? Let's go up here and do a video. All right, one thing that scientists are talking about so much is, why are the oceans heating up so much in the last year, 2 years? We've had excessive heat building up in the oceans, which is then spreading out on the land and giving us all these heat waves. Well, here's a little bit to think about of why this is happening. The G20 nations dished out at least $1 trillion in fossil fuel subsidies in 2022. This is running afoul of recent pledges to curb financial support for the sector most responsible for global climate emergencies. The IISD report estimates that the G20 governments provided a record $1.4 trillion in support for fossil fuel last year. That includes subsidies and loans for public financial institutions. It also severely limits the possibility of achieving climate objectives set by the Paris Agreement. A researcher noted that the surge in fossil fuel subsidies, which quadrupled in 2022 compared to the previous year, was largely due to a dramatic expansion in consumer support in response to peaking fossil fuel prices. So when the fossil fuels went up, remember, everybody was complaining, and we were also consuming as much as we could possibly consume because of the shortages. So manufacturers were manufacturing like never before. Suppliers were moving goods all over the planet like never before, and fuels were being used like never before. This helped households and businesses during the emergency crisis. At the 2021 GOP 26 summit in Glasgow, on 197 countries agreed to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, but did not agree on a time frame for action. Now the daily CO2 count is August 24, 2022, last year, is 416.54 parts per million. Now in 2023, it is 418.8 parts per million. So obviously part of the problem with the ocean warming is that we're having record amounts of CO2 going into the atmosphere because of our constant consumption and additional supplies of oil. And the nations around the world are telling us to travel, to work, to do things, to put money back into the system so we can have the good times again, where the stock market was high and lots of people were making lots of money. But unfortunately, when we do that, we put loads and loads of CO2 in the atmosphere, which warms up the planet, and all that heat goes into the oceans. And we haven't slowed down a bit. We're still producing more fossil fuels than we ever have before. We're drilling and expanding fossil fuels more than we ever have before, and it just isn't working. It's causing global catastrophe faster and faster. We're getting to that tipping point, or already past the tipping point, where we can't stop it no matter what we do. Now, I had a commenter on my video say that that alternative energy was not the answer, that it didn't do any good, wind power and solar. Yeah, I can understand that because we don't have enough of it and we have too many humans on the planet. If we had far fewer humans and the alternative energy was 25 to 30% of our energy use, then that energy could be used to make alternative energy products such as solar power and wind power. Not all of it can be used because it's pretty hard to heat up steel with just solar and wind power. There isn't enough of it. So we have to use things like coal and that sort of thing to get enough heat to melt the steel. But a lot of the parts and can be made with solar and wind power. The more we put on the grid, the more it will take over and the less we'll use fossil fuel. We have no other choice. There's no other alternative out there. And some people may say, well, what about nuclear energy? Nuclear energy is an absolute disaster. We have over 100 nuclear power plants, if not more. And if we ever go to World War III, like they're talking about, going to war with China and Russia and North Korea and Iran, that we're just going to be bombing all these plants, and the amount of radiation being thrown up in the air and on the land and in the water will be so much that we'll die from that. So we don't want nuclear power. And besides, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of human energy just to make nuclear power, where it's a lot cheaper to go with solar and wind power. We have no choice. There are no alternatives. There's no way fusion power is going to start anytime soon in the next century, if ever. Fusion power is more of a pipe dream than a reality. If you study it, you'll find out it just takes enormous amounts of energy to start it, and then to keep it going, it takes huge amounts of power. But once you get it going, then it supposedly can run on itself and supply people with electricity. I think that's all BS and is never going to happen. All right, people, if you have any comments on this, what's your thoughts? What's your ideas for dealing with the climate crisis? And what are we going to do about trying to make enough electricity for 8+ billion people on the planet? Why aren't we depopulating as fast as we can by adopting children instead of birthing children? Why are there so many mothers so hell-bent on having to have a child by birth instead of by adoption? The bloodline kind of thing is outdated and old. Doesn't matter what the blood is in the child, it's still a child and it needs support just like any other child. Just because it isn't your blood type doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. We could easily adopt all the unwanted children and reduce our numbers that way. There's so many ways we could do it, but it seems like humans aren't talking about it because the leaders aren't talking about it. They're playing around the edges saying, oh, we'll do this and that, and in reality they're not. So with that, I would love to see what your comments are on this, your ups, your new subscribers, and until next time.